Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our coaching, publishing, executive ghostwriting, and podcast production services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Lisa Tenner, author of The Ultimate Guide to Transforming Anger. Lisa, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
Are you ready to get started?
I am. Thanks.
All right. Question number one. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
So, my advice might vary depending on whether they're working on fiction or nonfiction, but the authors I work with are working on nonfiction. And so my first piece of advice to them is always get clear on your vision. Why are you writing this book, and why are you writing it for you? And why are you writing it for the reader? What do you hope to accomplish there? And, for the world, like, what is the difference you want to make with this book? So it could probably apply to fiction too, but for nonfiction, it's really key to have that vision first.
Absolutely. And what do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
So in my experience with working with, hundreds of authors, the biggest challenge they have is developing the platform that's going to help sell books. And particularly if they're looking for a traditional publishing deal, then they need to have that platform ahead of time. If you're self-publishing or hybrid publishing, you can actually use the book to grow your platform. But if you want a traditional publisher, you've got to have enough of a following or reach online and offline that publishers are going to think, wow, you're going to sell enough books to make it worth their investment. So it's that platform piece, I would say, that really people find the most challenging usually.
Well, this will connect nicely to our next question, which is partially based with building that platform, and that is to share a marketing strategy that you have used in your book launch that has worked well.
So I'm going to talk about the book launches of authors that I've worked with because my book was so long ago. Although I guess I could share a strategy from that too. Can I share two strategies?
Please.
Okay. So with the authors I work with now, I really encourage them to find a large platform where they can blog, because rather than have to start from scratch, they, if they're on Psychology Today and post some really strong posts, they have a likelihood of reaching an incredible number of people. Could be hundreds of thousands with that one post. But, and with one's individual blog, it's a little harder. So I often suggest that they look for a large platform, especially if they're an expert like Psychology Today, something like that. And that's worked really well for a number of my authors. In terms of something I used myself way back when my book came out, and with my co-authors, we did a lot of press releases that were tip lists, something that a journalist in a hurry could just basically take that press release and make it an article, stick it in that newspaper or magazine, and there it was. So I think if you do their work for them, journalists really like that. They're busy, they are way overworked, and this was something that really helped them out.
So tell us a little bit more about that strategy, because that's something that's very unique.
Yeah, so we had, because it was the ultimate guide to transforming anger, we had tips for an anger-free Valentine's Day, trips for road rage, trips for anger-free travel. We just, because that could be used for a travel magazine. So we thought of all the different audiences that could use different tips about anger, and then targeted media in all those areas, but with tips that were very specific to that. And another tip that I later learned from Joe Vitale and used with my with several of my clients that kind of plays on that is when you send out a tip list press release, you just give, let's say you say 10 tips for such and such, but you give the first 3 in the press release and then say go to and have your website address for the rest of the tips. And then that gets people to your website. And often for instance, the Providence Journal just published those top 3 tips of my clients and then just said at the bottom, go to, and then had her website for the rest of the tips. So it can be a way to get people right to your site.
So, in regards to this press release, so this sounds like not necessarily a traditional press release, something that has a little bit of a different flavor. Am I right with that?
Yes, yeah. A book press release usually doesn't go very far at all, but a press release that's geared towards newsworthy subjects, people are looking for that kind of content, and then you mention the book and you quote the author or yourself if you're writing the release in the book, then, I mean, in the press release, then that is much more likely to be picked up by the media. They're not doing a story on a book. They're providing useful, practical content for their readers, and then they mention your book and your credentials with that, and they quote you. So that's the way I would generally say this, particularly again with nonfiction.
And with your press release, so where did you submit the press release to?
Oh gosh. So we did have a publicist. They did all of that, but they submitted to Chicago area newspapers. They submitted to I'm trying to think particularly of the anger tips. I think the Valentine's one, they that was some magazines and newspapers, and then the uh, the travel ones were specifically to travel magazines. So they really did try to uh, niche market it, right, to all these different niche markets.
And just to share this with our audience too, so when people think about doing press releases and everything, we know there's a lot of services out there that will charge various amounts. But this seems like it's more of a traditional style where you actually did some research, you found specific newspapers, and just sent it to them specifically. Is that right?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. We had a publicist, so they did a variety of different things, but that was definitely one of the strategies. I mean, that was some time ago. Nowadays, um, a lot of journalists will just look online and they'll look on Twitter, and they'll look by hashtags. They'll just Google and look for particular articles. So if you have articles and blog posts that come up for particular keywords, that can really help you get found by journalists. So, things have changed now, but the press release strategy can still work. It just depends. There's a lot more strategies available to you nowadays than there were when that book came out.
Excellent. Well, let's talk about your favorite book. So, what is your favorite book, and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
So, I was thinking about this the other day. I think that in some ways, Siddhartha is it's hard to say one favorite book, but I love Siddhartha, and I think that was the book that really turned me on to reading. I was a very slow reader. My parents were like avid readers, and they had read so much more than I had when I was a kid, but when they were kids. But and I was like, I don't know if you remember, they had like I think they were called SRAs at the time, where you do this reading comprehension. I was always towards the end of the pack because I just read slowly, which probably makes me a good editor, but makes me a very slow reader. And so it really wasn't until high school, and I read Siddhartha, and I just fell in love with books. And then I was just devouring everything. And I think what it taught me uh, is to take risks with your writing, and to really follow your heart, because I think that Herman Hesse is a great example of someone who really did take risks and follow his heart when it came to his writing. It was he had a strong voice and an authentic voice. And, one of the things I love to help people with is finding their voice as a writer. And you won't find your voice unless you take risks.
And for a final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
This is a hard one because I think there's so many amazing quotes out there. But one of my inspirations is nature. And I love this Alice Walker quote: "In nature, nothing is perfect and everything is perfect. Trees can be contorted, bent in weird ways, and they're still beautiful. And I think as a writer, we're always writing about the imperfect, and it's important to be honest in what we see, to kind of show the perfection and the imperfection both.
Well, Lisa, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
They can go to my website, lisatenner.com. It's Lisaten as in Nancy, ER.com.
Well, Lisa, thank you once again for being on the show, and we wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
Thank you. My pleasure, and thank you for having me.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how you can be featured in our brand new Get Published business book, go to getpublishedpodcast.com.